The academy halls echoed with laughter that wasn't meant to be kind. Commander Elena Vasquez walked past clusters of her fellow cadets, their whispered jokes following her like shadows. At 23, she was older than most, having worked her way through the military ranks before earning her place at the Galactic Defense Academy. Her calloused hands and scarred knuckles told stories her peers couldn't understand. "Look, it's the janitor's daughter," sneered Marcus Chen, whose family had bought his way into the academy with old money from the Jupiter mining colonies. Still pretending she belongs here with real officers. Elena kept walking, her expression unchanged. She had learned long ago that responding only gave them more ammunition. Her mother hadn't been a janitor, but a maintenance engineer who kept entire space stations running. The distinction mattered to Elena, even if it didn't to them. Professor Kellerman's tactical analysis class was already in session when she slipped through the door. The holographic display showed a complex battle scenario involving 3 different alien species locked in territorial dispute near the Andromeda Gateway. Most students scribbled notes about troop movements and supply lines. But Elena saw something different. The conventional approach would be to establish a buffer zone, Kellerman explained, his weathered face bearing scars from the Proxima Wars. "Create neutral territory and enforce it with patrol fleets." Elena raised her hand. The room fell silent, not from respect but from anticipation of another moment they could mock later. "Yes, Vasquez? The Zephyrians don't think in terms of territorial boundaries like humans do," she said, standing as protocol demanded. Their hive consciousness sees space as flowing energy streams. If we create a buffer zone, we're actually cutting through what they consider their nervous system. It would be like someone putting a wall through your brain. Several students snickered. Marcus made a show of checking his tablet as if Elena wasn't worth listening to. "And your suggestion?" Kellerman asked, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp with interest. "The Korthak value honor above territory. The Zephyrians value harmony above expansion. Instead of separating them, we need to give them a shared purpose, something that honors Korthak tradition while maintaining Zephyrian energy flow. Maybe a joint exploration mission to the Dark Nebula region. Unknown territory that belongs to no one." The room erupted in derisive laughter. "Oh sure," called out Sarah Martinez, daughter of an admiral. "Let's just ask the warring aliens to hold hands and explore space together." Very practical, Vasquez, but Kellerman didn't laugh. He studied the holographic display, manipulating the alien fleet positions with quick gestures. Interesting perspective. "Your reasoning? Humans always assume everyone thinks like us," Elena continued, ignoring the eye rolls around her. "We see territory as something to own, space as something to divide. But what if that's just our limitation? What if the real solution isn't forcing our way of thinking on others, but understanding how they see the universe?" "Naive idealism," Marcus muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is military strategy, not philosophy class." Elena turned to face him directly. The Battle of Kepler Station was lost because Admiral Morrison assumed the Thek pirates would retreat when outgunned. He didn't understand that their culture sees retreat as a fate worse than death. 3,000 lives could have been saved with better cultural intelligence. "That's ancient history," Sarah shot back. "Modern warfare is about superior technology and tactical superiority. Modern warfare is about understanding your enemy better than they understand themselves," Elena replied quietly. "Technology means nothing if you're fighting the wrong battle." Kellerman cleared his throat, drawing attention back to the front. "We'll test Vasquez's hypothesis in next week's simulation. Class dismissed." As students filed out, Elena gathered her materials slowly, knowing what was coming. She could hear them already planning their evening entertainment at her expense. The expensive bars near the academy where she couldn't afford to go, where they would dissect her every word and conclude, once again, that the scholarship girl from the outer colonies had no business pretending to be an "Officer Vasquez." Kellerman's voice stopped her at the door. "Walk with me." They moved through corridors lined with portraits of famous naval commanders, most of whom had attended this very academy. Elena had studied their battles, learned their strategies, but none of them looked like her. None had clawed their way up from maintenance crews on frontier mining stations. "Your cultural analysis was sophisticated," Kellerman said as they walked. "Where did you learn to think that way?" "Growing up on Titan Station. My mother worked maintenance, so I spent time with everyone. Miners, traders, refugees from the border conflicts. You learn that people see the world differently when you actually listen to them. And your classmates don't listen. It wasn't a question." Elena chose her words carefully. They're not bad people. They just haven't had to learn that perspective matters. Kellerman stopped walking and turned to face her. His scarred face was serious, almost grim. Elena, I'm going to tell you something your peers haven't figured out yet. War is coming. Real war, not border skirmishes or pirate raids. Our intelligence suggests a massive alien confederation is mobilizing beyond the spiral arm. When it arrives, we'll need officers who can think beyond human assumptions. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. How long do we have? 18 months, maybe 2 years. He resumed walking. Your classmates are training for the last war. You're thinking about the next one. Remember that when they mock you. Sometimes being right is more important than being popular. That night, Elena sat in her small dormitory room, staring out at the stars through her narrow window. Somewhere out there, alien minds were making decisions that would reshape the galaxy, while her classmates celebrated their assumed superiority. She wondered if humanity was prepared for enemies who didn't think like humans at all. Her tablet chimed with a message from her mother, light years away on Titan Station. Simple words asking about her studies, hoping she was making friends. Elena typed back that everything was fine, that she was learning a lot. She didn't mention the laughter, the isolation, or the growing certainty that she was training for a war her peers couldn't even imagine. Outside her window, the stars seemed unusually bright, as if they were trying to tell her something. Elena listened, the way she had learned to listen to different voices, different perspectives. The universe was vast, and humanity was about to learn just how small they really were. 2 years later, the war came exactly as Kellerman had predicted. Elena stood on the bridge of the destroyer Defiant, watching her former classmates struggle with an enemy that defied every tactical manual ever written. The hegemony didn't just bring superior numbers and technology, they brought ways of thinking that turned human advantages into weaknesses. They're not responding to our flanking maneuvers, reported Marcus Chen, now a lieutenant commander on the flagship Sovereign. His voice crackled through the communication array, barely controlled panic bleeding through his professional training. Every time we try to outflank them, they seem to know our exact position before we get there. Elena watched the tactical display, seeing patterns her academy peers had missed for 6 months of bloody defeats. The alien ships moved like schools of fish, each vessel responding to threats not with individual tactics but as part of a collective consciousness. Human commanders kept trying to target their leader, to cut the head off the snake. But there was no head. There was only the school. Commander Vasquez, her captain, Rebecca Torres, looked at her with tired eyes. Elena had been promoted rapidly as casualties mounted, and fresh thinking became desperately needed. Your assessment? They're not using formation tactics, Elena said, manipulating the holographic display to highlight movement patterns. Look at this. When we attack from the left, the entire fleet shifts like liquid. When we attack from the right, same response. They're not thinking about formations at all. Then what are they thinking about? Torres asked. Elena had been studying captured hegemony technology for weeks, trying to understand minds that operated on fundamentally different principles. Harmony. They see our attacks as disruptions to their natural flow. Every time we try to divide their forces, we're actually making them stronger because we're giving them something to harmonize against. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of instruments and the distant sound of weapons fire from the ongoing battle. Elena knew what they were thinking. Here was the scholarship girl from the colonies again, spouting theories while good people died. Recommendations? Torres asked quietly. We stop trying to divide them. Instead, we create what they can't harmonize with. Chaos. Explain. Elena pulled up a new tactical configuration on the display. Random attack patterns, no formation discipline. Ships acting independently with no coordination make our fleet look like debris caught in a solar storm. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, now the tactical officer, looked horrified. That goes against every principle of naval warfare. We'll be destroyed piecemeal. Maybe, Elena admitted. Or maybe we'll be doing something their collective consciousness can't adapt to because there's nothing to adapt to. No pattern to read. No formation to counter. Torres studied the display for a long moment. Around them, the battle raged as another human task force tried conventional tactics against an enemy that had evolved beyond conventional thinking. The casualty reports painted a grim picture. All ships, Torres announced over the fleet channel. New orders. Break formation. Repeat break formation. All vessels are to attack independently. Random vectors, random timing. No coordination. Captain, Sarah protested. This is madness. This is what we have left, Torres replied grimly. Execute Elena's plan. What followed was the strangest battle in human military history. The Defiant and her sister ships scattered like leaves in a hurricane, each attacking from different angles with no apparent coordination. Human captains, trained for decades in formation discipline, found themselves flying their ships like pirates rather than naval officers, and it worked. The hegemony fleet, faced with attacks that had no pattern to harmonize with, began to lose cohesion. Their ships started responding to individual threats rather than collective ones. For the first time since the war began, human forces saw alien vessels collide with each other as their perfect coordination broke down. They're retreating, Sarah reported, her voice filled with disbelief. The entire hegemony fleet is withdrawing. Elena watched the tactical display as the alien ships pulled back in obvious confusion. But she felt no triumph, only a heavy understanding of what this meant. They'll adapt. This won't work twice, so how long do we have? Torres asked. Maybe a few weeks before they develop a counter to chaos tactics. They'll probably create multiple sub-collectives that can operate independently while maintaining overall harmony. Torres nodded grimly. Then we better make those weeks count. News of the victory at Kepler 7 spread through the human fleet faster than light communications could carry it. Elena found herself summoned to fleet headquarters, where Admiral Morrison, the same man whose cultural blindness had cost lives at Kepler Station, wanted to understand how a junior commander had achieved what his best strategists could not. Impressive work, Commander, Morrison said, his weathered face showing grudging respect. Though I have to ask how you knew this would work. I didn't know, sir. I guessed. Based on understanding how they think differently from us, and how exactly do they think. Elena pulled up a holographic model of hegemony fleet behavior. They don't see individual ships at all. They see energy flows, harmony patterns, collective responses. When we attack in formation, we're speaking their language. They can read us like a book. But chaos isn't a language. It's just noise. Morrison studied the display, his expression thoughtful. Can this approach be scaled up? Applied to larger engagements? Not the same tactics. They'll adapt to chaos just like they adapted to our formations, but the principle works. We need to keep thinking like humans instead of trying to out-alien the aliens. Meaning, we're individuals who choose to cooperate. They're a collective that can't help but harmonize. Our strength isn't our technology or our tactics. It's our ability to be unpredictable, to change our minds, to disagree with each other and still work together. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. The other commanders want to promote you to full commander, give you a cruiser squadron. Elena felt a familiar weight settle on her shoulders. But you have concerns, I have questions, about whether the daughter of a maintenance engineer really understands the bigger picture, about whether unconventional tactics can win a conventional war. There it was, the same prejudice that had followed her through the academy, dressed up in military courtesy. Elena straightened her shoulders and met his gaze directly. Sir, with respect, the bigger picture is that we're losing. Badly. Conventional tactics against an unconventional enemy have cost us 60% of our fleet and pushed us back to the inner colonies. Maybe it's time to trust someone who never learned that certain things were impossible. Morrison's expression softened slightly. You remind me of myself at your age, convinced that the old ways were wrong. Were they wrong, sir? Some of them. He pulled up deployment orders on his desk display. Very well, Commander. You'll have the Defiant and 3 destroyers. Your mission is to harry their supply lines and probe for weaknesses. But remember, winning one battle doesn't win a war. Elena saluted and turned to leave, but Morrison's voice stopped her at the door. Commander Vasquez, your mother must be proud. For the first time in months, Elena smiled. She always said the best engineers are the ones who see problems differently, sir. I guess I learned more on Titan Station than I thought. As she walked back to her ship, Elena could feel the weight of expectations and doubt following her. Her peers still whispered about the lucky victory, the fluke tactics that wouldn't work again. But Elena knew something they didn't. The war wasn't just about defeating the hegemony. It was about proving that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their tactics. It was their stubborn refusal to think like anyone else. The hegemony adapted faster than Elena had hoped. Within 3 weeks, their fleets were operating in smaller, independent swarms that could handle chaotic attacks while maintaining collective coordination. Human forces found themselves facing an enemy that had learned from their defeat and evolved beyond it. Elena stood in the war room aboard the orbital station Haven's Rest, studying intelligence reports that painted an increasingly desperate picture. The enemy wasn't just adapting tactically, they were learning to think like humans while retaining their collective advantages. "They're using our own tactics against us now," reported Captain James Walsh, a grizzled veteran who had survived the first wave of hegemony attacks. "Random assault patterns, unpredictable movements, but they're doing it better than we can because they still coordinate perfectly underneath the chaos." Admiral Morrison paced behind the holographic display, his face showing the strain of commanding a losing war. "So they have our unpredictability plus their natural coordination. What do we have?" Elena had been asking herself the same question for days. She pulled up a new analysis on the display, showing patterns she had noticed in recent engagements. They're still thinking collectively, even when they act individually. Look at this engagement at Proxima Beta. Their ships appear to be acting randomly, but watch the timing. The hologram showed hegemony vessels attacking a human convoy from multiple directions with no apparent coordination. But Elena highlighted the exact moments of each attack, showing a precise mathematical progression that was invisible unless you knew to look for it. "They're not truly random," she continued. "They're following complex algorithms that appear random to us but are actually highly coordinated. It's like jazz improvisation. It sounds spontaneous, but every musician is still following the same rhythm. So we're facing an enemy that can be both collective and individual simultaneously," Morrison said grimly. "How do we fight that?" Elena hesitated, knowing her next words would sound like madness. "We stopped trying to fight them at all." The room fell silent. Several officers exchanged glances that Elena recognized from her academy days. Here was the colonial engineer's daughter, proposing something so absurd it could only come from someone who didn't understand real warfare. "Explain," Morrison said, his voice carefully neutral. "Every engagement we've had, we've been trying to defeat them, destroy their ships, disrupt their formations, force them to retreat. But what if victory isn't about beating them? What if it's about making them not want to fight us?" Captain Walsh shook his head. "Commander, the hegemony has been expanding across the galaxy for centuries. They don't negotiate. They don't retreat permanently. They absorb or eliminate everything in their path." "Because everything in their path has tried to fight them on their terms," Elena replied. "What if we don't?" She pulled up a star chart showing hegemony expansion patterns over the past 50 years. "Look at their conquered territories. Every species that fought them conventionally was either destroyed or absorbed into their collective. But here and here and here." She highlighted several systems on the galactic rim, species that simply disappeared before the hegemony arrived. "Not destroyed, not absorbed, gone." "Suggesting what?" Morrison asked. "That some civilizations found a third option, not fight or flight, but something else entirely." Elena manipulated the display to show shipping manifests and communication logs from the months before those civilizations vanished. The Zephyrians from the Academy simulation. Remember them? They disappeared 6 months before the hegemony reached their space. But their energy signatures are still out there, moving through deep space in patterns that don't match any known technology. You think they're still alive? I think they found a way to exist that the hegemony can't understand or absorb. And I think we need to do the same. The room erupted in arguments. Officers who had spent their careers learning to stand and fight couldn't accept the idea of simply vanishing. Elena listened to their objections, understanding their perspective while knowing they were thinking too small. "What exactly are you proposing?" Morrison asked, cutting through the debate. Elena took a deep breath. "The hegemony conquers by absorbing. They understand civilizations in terms of territory, technology, and population. But what if we became something they can't categorize? Not a civilization trying to hold territory, but something else entirely, such as nomads, wanderers, a people who exist in the spaces between stars rather than on worlds. Ships that never stay in one place long enough to be conquered. Populations that spread out so far and move so constantly that there's nothing central to absorb." Captain Walsh looked horrified. "You're talking about abandoning our colonies, our worlds, everything we've built." "I'm talking about saving our species by becoming something new," Elena replied quietly. The hegemony can conquer the human civilization we've built, but they can't conquer a human civilization that doesn't exist in any form they recognize. Morrison studied the star charts for a long moment. The logistics alone would be staggering. Moving entire populations into deep space, maintaining them without planetary infrastructure, keeping them supplied and coordinated while constantly moving. It would require a complete transformation of human society. Elena agreed. But consider the alternative. In 6 months, maybe a year, we'll have lost the core worlds. Earth itself will fall. At least this way humanity survives. As refugees, Walsh said bitterly. As something new, Elena countered. The hegemony expects us to be like every other species they've encountered. Territorial, technological, predictable. What if we became the first species they couldn't figure out how to fight? Morrison walked to the observation window, staring out at the stars. You realize what you're asking? To give up everything that makes us human? No, sir. To embrace what makes us most human. Our ability to adapt, to change, to become something unexpected when survival demands it. Other species are locked into their evolutionary patterns. Humans invent themselves. The discussion continued for hours, with most officers rejecting Elena's proposal as impossible or cowardly. But as reports came in of fresh defeats and falling defensive lines, the impossible began to look merely difficult. Finally, Morrison turned back to the group. Commander Vasquez, I'm authorizing a small-scale test of your concept. Take a volunteer convoy of non-essential personnel and civilian ships. See if your nomadic approach can actually work in practice. Elena felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. How long do I have? The hegemony will reach the outer defense perimeter in 4 months. If your experiment shows promise, we'll consider a larger implementation. If not, we'll face our end standing and fighting. As the meeting broke up, Elena found herself alone with the star charts and the overwhelming magnitude of what she was proposing. She wasn't just asking humanity to change tactics, she was asking them to change what it meant to be human. Her tablet chimed with a message from her mother on Titan Station, the maintenance engineer who had taught her daughter to listen to different voices, to see problems from unexpected angles. Elena typed back a simple message. I'm about to try something that everyone thinks is impossible. Wish me luck. The response came back quickly. Impossible things are just problems nobody has solved the right way yet. Show them how it's done. Elena smiled and began pulling up ship manifests and population data. She had 4 months to prove that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their ability to fight, but their ability to become something that couldn't be fought at all. Outside the observation window, the stars waited in patient silence, holding spaces vast enough for an entire civilization to lose itself and, in doing so, find a new way to survive. Elena's nomadic experiment began with 300 volunteers and a fleet of converted cargo haulers, mining ships, and research vessels. They called themselves the Wanderer Fleet, though Elena privately thought of them as humanity's first attempt to evolve in real time. The early weeks were brutal. Ships designed for planetary support struggled to maintain life systems during constant movement. Families crowded into cargo bays converted to living spaces. Children who had never known anything but solid ground beneath their feet had to learn to sleep while ships jumped through hyperspace every few hours. This is madness, Dr. Sarah Chen muttered as she treated another case of jump sickness in the makeshift medical bay aboard the Horizon's Edge. We're not nomads. We're refugees pretending to be explorers. Elena watched through the observation port as their fleet scattered across empty space, each ship following a different trajectory before they would reconvene at the next gathering point. Maybe, but we're refugees the hegemony can't find. Because there's nothing to find, Chen replied bitterly. We're not building anything, not defending anything, not achieving anything except survival. Survival is achievement enough right now. Elena understood the frustration. She felt it herself every time she received reports from the main war effort. While they drifted through empty space, real battles were being fought and lost. Her former classmates were dying heroically while she led civilians in what looked like elaborate cowardice. But something unexpected was happening among the Wanderer fleet, cut off from traditional human infrastructure, forced to rely only on what they carried and what they could improvise. People were adapting in ways Elena hadn't anticipated. Commander, you need to see this, called Lieutenant Marcus Rivera, one of the few military officers who had volunteered for the experiment. He was monitoring communications from one of the civilian ships. Elena listened to the transmission and felt her perspective shift fundamentally. The mining ship Deep Fortune had encountered a problem with their life support recycling system. Instead of requesting help from the fleet's technical specialists, they had developed their own solution using principles they'd learned from studying hegemony technology. "They're not just maintaining our equipment," Rivera explained. "They're evolving it. Look at this modification to their water recycling system. It's using bioneural interfaces adapted from captured hegemony tech, but implemented in a completely human way." Elena studied the technical specifications with growing excitement. They're not trying to copy alien technology. They're learning from it and making it more human. More human how? The hegemony's version would require perfect coordination between all components. The human version allows individual parts to fail without bringing down the whole system. It's messier, less efficient, but more resilient. Over the following weeks, Elena watched similar innovations emerge throughout the fleet. Farmers who had lost their land were developing hydroponic systems that could operate in zero gravity. Engineers were creating modular habitats that could be assembled and disassembled in hours. Teachers were developing educational programs that worked for children who might never see the same stars twice. Most importantly, people were learning to think like nomads while remaining fundamentally human. "Commander," Dr. Chen approached her with a data pad full of medical reports. "I owe you an apology." "And an explanation." Elena looked up from her own reports, curious about the change in Chen's tone. "The physical adaptations we're seeing aren't just psychological," Chen continued. "Constant microgravity exposure is actually changing our bone density and muscle development. The children especially are adapting to three-dimensional thinking in ways that would be impossible on a planetary surface." Meaning, we're not just learning to live like nomads. We're becoming something new, a variant of humanity adapted for life in deep space. Elena felt a chill of understanding. How new? Different enough that we'll never be quite the same as planetary humans again. Different enough that the hegemony might not recognize us as the same species they've been fighting. That night, Elena sat alone in her quarters, staring at intelligence reports from the main war. The hegemony had broken through the outer defensive perimeter ahead of schedule. Human forces were in full retreat toward the core worlds. Earth itself was now under direct threat. Her tablet chimed with an encrypted message from Admiral Morrison. "Your experiment is our only remaining option. How quickly can you scale up?" Elena stared at the message for a long time before responding. Not quickly enough to save the core worlds, but quickly enough to save humanity. She began composing orders that would transform the Wanderer fleet from an experiment into an exodus. Every human world beyond the hegemony's immediate advance would receive the same choice: stay and fight a battle they couldn't win, or join the nomadic fleet and become something new. The response was mixed. Many worlds chose to stand and fight, preferring death with honor to life as wanderers. But others, especially the frontier colonies that had always lived on the edge of survival, began preparing their populations for the Great Dispersal. Elena found herself coordinating the largest voluntary migration in human history, all while dodging hegemony scout fleets that were still trying to locate and destroy human naval assets. It required timing that was part logistics, part intuition, and part luck. The Freedom's Rest convoy reports successful evacuation of the Kepler mining colony, Rivera announced during one of their daily briefings. 200,000 civilians plus their entire industrial base broken down into portable components. And the hegemony response? They arrived 6 hours after the last ship departed. Our intelligence suggests they spent several days searching for any remaining human presence before concluding the system was abandoned. Elena nodded, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. Another world lost, but another population saved. How many fleets do we have operating now? 47 major convoys plus hundreds of smaller groups. Total population approaching 15 million and growing. 15 million humans learning to live between the stars, adapting to a way of life that had never existed before. Elena wondered if they were saving humanity or transforming it beyond recognition. Perhaps both. Her mother's latest message arrived as she was reviewing population distribution reports. The word is spreading even out here. People calling you the shepherd of stars. Your father would have been proud. Elena smiled sadly. Her father had died in a mining accident when she was 12, but she remembered his stories about the early asteroid miners who had learned to live in space when planetary life was too dangerous or too crowded. Maybe this was just the next step in an evolution that had started generations ago. Outside her observation window, the stars looked different now. Not distant suns warming other worlds, but waypoints in an endless journey. The hegemony could conquer worlds, absorb civilizations, and remake entire sectors of the galaxy in their image. But they had never faced a civilization that refused to stay in one place long enough to be conquered. Elena was betting humanity's future on their inability to adapt to an enemy that had chosen to evolve rather than fight. In the deep spaces between stars, 15 million humans were learning what it meant to be nomads. Whether they were refugees or pioneers remained to be seen. The news reached Elena 6 months into the Great Dispersal. Earth had fallen, not destroyed but absorbed into the hegemony's collective consciousness. Admiral Morrison's final transmission was brief and formal, reporting that resistance had ended and recommending that all surviving human forces consider unconditional surrender. Elena read the message twice before deleting it. Surrender was no longer possible for the Wanderer fleets. They called themselves the Drift Alliance, and they had been waiting for humanity to join them. Your species shows remarkable adaptability, transmitted the Zephyrian representative, its thoughts flowing through Elena's mind like music made of mathematics. Most civilizations that attempt nomadic transformation lose their essential nature. You have retained your humanity while gaining stellar consciousness. Elena found herself in the unprecedented position of representing humanity to alien allies rather than enemies. The irony wasn't lost on her. After years of her peers dismissing her cultural insights, she was now humanity's ambassador to a galactic confederation her academy training had never imagined. "What do you mean by stellar consciousness?" she asked. "Your children navigate by stellar wind patterns," the Korthak delegate replied, its voice carrying undertones of deep respect. "Your engineers build habitats that flow with cosmic forces rather than fighting them. Your people have learned to see the galaxy as home rather than hostile wilderness. This is what we call stellar consciousness." Dr. Chen, monitoring the exchange, looked fascinated and terrified in equal measure. "Commander, they're describing evolutionary changes that should take thousands of years. We've accomplished this transformation in less than 2 years. Because humans adapt through choice rather than genetic drift," the Zephyrian explained, somehow reading their conversation. "Your species makes conscious decisions to become something new. This is unprecedented among sapient life." Elena learned that the Drift Alliance had been observing human evolution with growing excitement. Where other species had fled the hegemony and slowly adapted to nomadic existence over centuries, humans had made a deliberate choice to transform themselves in real time. "The hegemony conquers by absorption," the Korthak continued. "They understand civilizations that hold territory, that build static infrastructures, that think in terms of possession and defense. But they cannot absorb what they cannot locate, cannot understand what constantly changes, cannot predict what chooses its own evolution." "Are you saying we're safe from them?" "You are saying you are safe from them," the Zephyrian replied. "By becoming nomads, you have become ungovernable. By choosing adaptation over resistance, you have made yourselves unconquerable." Elena felt a strange mix of triumph and loss. Humanity had survived by becoming something new, but they had paid the price of everything they had been. Earth was gone. The great cities, the ancient cultures, the planetary civilizations that had defined human identity for millennia, all absorbed into hegemony collective consciousness. "Commander," Rivera approached with a concerned expression. "We're receiving transmissions from the remaining hegemony scout vessels. They're not attack formations." Elena studied the incoming data with growing amazement. The hegemony ships that had been studying the human fleets were withdrawing, not to attack but to retreat. After weeks of observation, they had reached a conclusion that changed everything. "They've reclassified us," Dr. Chen announced, reading the decoded transmissions. "We're no longer categorized as a conquered civilization or a military threat. According to their analysis, the human species has undergone spontaneous speciation. We're now classified as Homo stellaris, a separate species adapted for interstellar existence." Elena stared at the classifications with a mixture of awe and grief. Humanity had survived by becoming no longer entirely human. The children born in the fleets would be citizens of the galaxy itself, adapted for life among the stars in ways their Earth-born ancestors never could have imagined. The hegemony does not absorb species that have no fixed infrastructure to absorb, the Korthak explained. You have made yourselves into something they cannot conquer, because there is nothing solid enough to conquer. Elena's tablet chimed with messages from fleet commanders across the galaxy. The word was spreading. The hegemony was withdrawing from active pursuit of human forces, not because they had been defeated, but because they no longer recognized humans as the same species they had been fighting. What happens now? Helena asked the Alliance representatives. Now you learn what it means to be truly free, the Zephyrian replied. Free from planets, free from territory, free from the limitations that bind other species to single worlds or single star systems. Your children will grow up as citizens of the galaxy itself. Elena thought of her mother's last message, sent just before Titan Station fell to hegemony forces. The stars are calling you home. Elena. Show them what humans can become when they stop being afraid of change. She had shown them. Humanity had become something unprecedented, a species that chose its own evolution, that transformed itself in real time rather than accepting extinction. The price had been everything they had been. The reward was everything they could become. As Elena watched the hegemony ships disappear into hyperspace, she realized that the war was over. Not because anyone had won or lost, but because the participants had become something that made war itself irrelevant. 30 million humans now drifted between the stars, no longer bound by the limitations of planetary existence. They were pioneers of a new kind of civilization, explorers of a way of life that had never existed before. Elena had led them not to victory, but to transformation. In becoming nomads, they had become something the galaxy had been waiting for, a species that could live anywhere, adapt to anything and remain fundamentally human while embracing infinite change. The stars no longer whispered of war. They sang of possibilities that stretched to the edge of the universe and beyond, had become something the hegemony couldn't accept surrender from because they couldn't understand what the humans had become. Commander, Lieutenant Rivera approached her station aboard the Star Walker, the converted research vessel that served as her mobile command center. We're receiving signals from hegemony scout probes. They're not trying to attack or communicate. They're just watching. Elena studied the sensor readings with growing concern. 3 hegemony vessels had been shadowing different human fleets for weeks, maintaining distance but never engaging. Their behavior was unlike anything in previous encounters. Recommendations? She asked her senior staff. Dr. Chen, now serving as the fleet's cultural analyst, pulled up behavioral models on the holographic display. They're studying us, trying to understand what we've become before deciding how to respond. And what have we become? Helena asked, though she suspected she already knew. Something unprecedented, Chen replied. A technological civilization without a home base, a military force that doesn't defend territory, a society that exists entirely in motion. Elena nodded grimly. The Wanderer fleets now numbered 87 separate convoys with a combined population of 30 million humans. They had established supply caches throughout unexplored space, developed mobile manufacturing capabilities, and created communication networks that spanned half the galaxy. Most importantly, they had begun to think like a nomadic species while retaining human ingenuity and adaptability. The children worry me most, Dr. Chen continued, and excite me most. The ones born in the fleets have never known planetary gravity or fixed horizons. They think in 3 dimensions and navigate by stellar drift patterns. They're becoming something new. New how? They don't see space as empty between destinations. To them, space is home. The fleet is their world, and the universe is their backyard. Elena pondered this as she watched the latest reports from her scattered fleets. Children born in hyperspace were learning mathematics based on stellar navigation. Teenagers who had never walked on solid ground were becoming engineers who could design habitats that functioned in any gravitational environment. Adults who had lost everything were discovering skills they never knew they possessed. Commander, Rivera interrupted her thoughts. Priority transmission from the Kepler mining fleet. Captain Zhang reports contact with non-human vessels. Elena felt her pulse quicken. Hegemony? Negative. Unknown configuration. They're requesting dialogue. Elena stared at the communication panel. In 2 years of war, no one had reported aliens requesting dialogue. The hegemony absorbed or destroyed. Other species fled or fought. No one talked. Put me through to Captain Zhang. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the weathered face of Captain Maria Zhang, former commander of a mining operation who had become one of Elena's most trusted fleet leaders. Commander Vasquez, Zhang began without preamble. We have a situation that doesn't fit any of our scenarios. 3 ships, definitely artificial but unlike anything in our databases. They've been following us for 6 hours, transmitting mathematical sequences that our computers recognize as peaceful contact protocols. Species? Unknown. But Commander, they're not trying to communicate with us as if we're a planetary civilization. Their signals are designed for mobile populations. They recognize what we've become. Elena felt a chill of realization. 5 years after joining the Drift Alliance, Elena stood in the observation deck of the Stellar Symphony, watching a sight that would have been impossible to imagine during her academy days. Human children were playing in zero gravity with young Zephyrians, their laughter mixing with harmonic energy patterns that painted aurora across the ship's hull. Commander, Dr. Chen approached, though Elena's title had evolved beyond military rank. She was now called the Shepherd, a name that had emerged naturally among the fleets. The Council of Voices is ready for your input on the Proxima Centauri situation. Elena nodded, though her attention remained on the children. The human youngsters were teaching their alien friends a game that involved launching themselves between gravity fields while maintaining perfect mathematical formations. It was beautiful, impossible, and utterly natural to them. How many generations will it take before they're more comfortable in space than we ever were on planets? She wondered aloud. Based on current adaptation rates, probably just this one, Chen replied. The teenagers born in the first evacuation fleets already show spatial reasoning abilities that exceed their parents by orders of magnitude. Elena followed Chen to the council chamber, a spherical room at the ship's center where representatives from all Alliance species could interact without the constraints of directional gravity. The Proxima Centauri situation was typical of the new challenges they faced. Not military threats, but ethical dilemmas. The hegemony has completed their absorption of the Proxima system, reported the Korthak delegate, its translated voice carrying undertones of barely controlled anger. Approximately 40 million sentient beings now exist as part of their collective consciousness. The question before us is whether this constitutes genocide or transcendence. Elena studied the holographic display showing Proxima Centauri's transformation. Where 3 thriving worlds had once orbited the red dwarf star, there was now a single massive construct that pulsed with the synchronized thoughts of billions of minds. From outside, it looked like paradise. Perfect harmony, no conflict, no suffering. From inside, Elena knew, there were no longer any individuals left to experience paradise. The absorbed populations show no signs of distress, the Zephyrian representative added, its thoughts tasting of complex mathematical uncertainty. Their collective reports indicate complete satisfaction with their new existence. By their own measurements, they are happier and more fulfilled than they were as individuals. But they're no longer themselves, Elena said quietly. They've been dissolved into something larger. Is that inherently wrong? Asked a delegate from the Keth, a species of crystalline beings who had achieved nomadic status by learning to exist as distributed mineral networks across asteroid fields. Your own species has undergone transformation that would be unrecognizable to your ancestors. Elena considered the comparison. Humans had indeed changed dramatically, but they remained fundamentally human in their capacity for individual choice, for disagreement, for stubborn independence. The hegemony's absorbed populations showed none of these traits. The difference is consent, she finally said. We chose our transformation. The absorbed populations weren't given that choice. But they consented after absorption, the Korthak delegate pointed out. Their collective consciousness genuinely believes their current existence is superior to their previous individual states. Elena felt the weight of a decision that would define the Alliance's relationship with the hegemony for generations to come. For 5 years, they had maintained an uneasy peace based on mutual avoidance. The hegemony continued absorbing planetary civilizations, while the Alliance rescued those who chose nomadic transformation. But the Proxima situation forced a question they had been avoiding. What responsibility did they have to populations that didn't want to be rescued? I need to speak with them directly, Elena announced. The council chamber fell silent. Direct contact with hegemony collective consciousness was unprecedented and potentially dangerous. The Alliance species had maintained their independence by avoiding the kind of mental integration that made absorption possible. Commander Vasquez, the Zephyrian, delegate's thoughts carried warning harmonics. Contact with collective consciousness has never been attempted by an individual mind. The risk of involuntary absorption is significant, but possible to prevent, theoretically. Your species' unusual adaptability might provide protection, but the risk remains substantial. Elena thought of the children playing in the observation deck, human and alien together, learning to exist in ways that transcended the limitations of their birth species. They represented possibilities that couldn't exist if the galaxy was divided between nomadic freedom and collective absorption. Set up the communication array, she ordered, but maintain full isolation protocols. If I show any signs of absorption, cut the connection immediately. The preparation took 6 hours. Elena found herself in a specially shielded chamber, surrounded by Alliance technology designed to protect individual consciousness from collective integration. She was about to become the first person to speak directly with the hegemony collective while maintaining her independence. The connection formed slowly, like diving into an ocean of synchronized thoughts. Elena felt the vast presence of billions of minds thinking in perfect harmony. Their individual voices dissolved into a cosmic symphony of shared consciousness. We greet the anomalous human. The collective spoke with a voice composed of millions of individual tones blended into unity. Your presence isn't unexpected. I'm here to understand, Elena replied, fighting the sensation of her thoughts being examined by entities that had forgotten what privacy meant. To learn whether absorption is salvation or destruction. Those concepts are identical from our perspective. Destruction of isolation enables salvation through unity. Your species' choice to remain fragmented is perplexing. Elena felt the collective's genuine confusion. They couldn't understand why anyone would choose individual existence over perfect harmony. From their perspective, the Alliance species were perpetually suffering from the tragedy of separate consciousness. Show me, Elena said. Show me what absorption means. What followed was the most terrifying and beautiful experience of Elena's life. For a brief moment, she felt what it was like to be part of something infinitely larger than herself. Every question had an answer. Every need was met by the collective resources of billions of minds. There was no loneliness, no uncertainty, no conflict. It was peace beyond individual comprehension, and it was wrong in ways that Elena couldn't fully articulate. You see, the collective said as Elena fought to maintain her separate identity, we offer perfection. Why do you choose suffering? Because the suffering is ours, Elena replied, her voice strained with the effort of remaining herself. Because choice itself has value even when the choices are wrong, inefficient, painful, illogical, human. Elena felt the collective's vast incomprehension, the inability of billions of merged minds to understand why anyone would choose individual pain over collective peace. But she also sensed something else, a deep loneliness that the collective couldn't acknowledge. They were complete, perfect, and utterly alone in their unity. We could complete you, the collective offered, end your isolation, give you perfect belonging, and end everything that makes me human, Elena replied. Thank you, but no. She cut the connection and found herself gasping in the isolation chamber, her sense of individual identity flooding back like air to drowning lungs. Dr. Chen and the Alliance delegates surrounded her with concerned expressions. Status report? Chen asked. Elena took several deep breaths before answering. They're not evil. They genuinely believe they're offering salvation, but they can't understand that salvation forced upon someone isn't salvation at all. And the Proxima populations? Happy. Genuinely, completely happy. And completely gone. Elena stood slowly, her legs shaky from the neural strain. We can't save people who don't want to be saved, but we can make sure that everyone knows there's an alternative. Elena's decision shaped Alliance policy for the next century. They would not interfere with voluntary absorption, but they would always offer the choice of nomadic transformation to any species facing hegemony expansion. They became the guardians of alternative evolution, the shepherds of civilizations that chose change over unity. The galaxy settled into an unprecedented equilibrium. The hegemony absorbed those who sought perfect harmony, while the Alliance welcomed those who preferred chaotic freedom. Both paths led to transcendence, but transcendence of fundamentally different kinds. Elena had learned that the greatest victory wasn't defeating an enemy, but creating a universe where different forms of consciousness could coexist without destroying each other. The stars whispered of many kinds of peace, and humanity had chosen the most difficult and most human path of all. 20 years after the first evacuation, Elena stood before the memorial wall aboard the Eternal Journey, the massive ship that served as humanity's mobile capital. Holographic displays showed the names of every world humanity had lost, every person who had chosen absorption over transformation, every dream that had been sacrificed for survival. At 63, Elena carried the weight of decisions that had reshaped not just humanity, but the entire galactic order. Her hair was silver now, her face lined with years of impossible choices, but her eyes still held the stubborn determination that had carried her through academy mockery and galactic war. "Grandmother Elena," called a voice behind her. She turned to see Maya Chen Vasquez, her adopted granddaughter, approaching with the fluid zero-gravity movement of the spaceborne generation. At 15, Maya had never felt planetary gravity or breathed unprocessed air, yet she embodied everything beautiful about humanity's transformation. "The Council is ready for your final address," Maya said, her voice carrying the mixed accent of someone who had learned to speak from people representing dozen worlds and 3 species. Elena nodded, taking one last look at the memorial wall. Tomorrow, she would step down as shepherd of the human fleets, passing leadership to a generation that had been born among the stars. It was time for the nomadic phase of human evolution to choose its own direction. The Grand Assembly Hall was packed with representatives from across the Drift Alliance. Humans floated beside Zephyrians whose energy forms painted constantly shifting aurora across the chamber walls. Korthak warriors shared space with crystalline Keth nodes and half a dozen other species that had chosen transformation over absorption. "My friends," Elena began, her voice carried to every ship in the Alliance network by quantum communication systems that spanned half the galaxy. "When I first proposed that humanity become nomads, most people thought I was suggesting we become refugees. Instead, we became pioneers of a new form of civilization." She gestured to the holographic display showing the current state of human space. What had once been a few desperate refugee fleets was now a vast network of mobile cities, research stations, and manufacturing platforms that moved through space like a 3-dimensional river of consciousness. Today, 150 million humans call the void between stars their home. Our children navigate by pulsar rhythms and design habitats that exist in dimensions planetary engineers never imagined. We have become something unprecedented in galactic history, a technological civilization that exists entirely in motion. Elena paused, looking out at faces that represented the most successful cultural transformation in known history. But our greatest achievement isn't technological. It's philosophical. We have proven that consciousness can choose its own evolution. The Zephyrian representatives' thoughts hummed with agreement, their energy patterns shifting into harmonics that translated as deep respect. "The young human speaks truth that resonates across dimensional barriers," they communicated. "Your species has become the teachers of voluntary transcendence." Elena smiled at being called young by a being that existed as living starlight, but the title felt appropriate. The spaceborne generation that was taking leadership from her was young in ways that transcended age. They thought in possibilities that their planet-bound ancestors couldn't have conceived. "The hegemony continues to offer perfect unity to those who seek it," Elena continued. "We continue to offer chaotic freedom to those who choose it. But we've discovered something neither path anticipated, the possibility of cooperation between different forms of consciousness." She activated another display showing recent Alliance achievements. Joint research projects between collective hegemony science and individual Alliance creativity had produced technologies that neither could have developed alone. Art forms that required both unified consciousness and individual interpretation. Exploration missions that mapped regions of space too dangerous for any single form of awareness to navigate. "The war we thought we were fighting was never really about survival," Elena said. "It was about the right to remain ourselves while becoming something more." Today, consciousness itself has more options than ever before in galactic history. Maya floated forward, representing the next generation of human leadership. At 15, she possessed spatial reasoning abilities that exceeded the best navigators of Elena's generation, linguistic skills that allowed her to communicate directly with alien consciousness forms, and an understanding of nomadic civilization that was purely intuitive. "Shepherd Elena," Maya said, using the formal title one last time. "The spaceborne generation accepts the responsibility of leadership. We will carry forward the principles you established: choice before unity, transformation before stagnation, cooperation before conquest." Elena felt a deep satisfaction watching her granddaughter take on the role that had defined her own life. Maya and her generation would face challenges Elena couldn't imagine, make decisions that would affect species not yet contacted, and guide human evolution along paths that were still being discovered. "The stars still whisper," Elena said, speaking now to the historical record that would preserve this moment across centuries. "But they no longer whisper of war. They whisper of possibilities that stretch to the edge of imagination and beyond." She activated the final display, a map of current Alliance exploration, showing the edges of known space where human vessels worked alongside alien partners to discover what lay beyond the galactic rim. In just 20 years, the desperate refugees fleeing Earth had become the scouts of galactic civilization, pushing into unknown regions with the fearless curiosity that had always defined humanity at its best. "To those who will lead after us," Elena concluded, "remember that the greatest victory is not defeating an enemy, but creating a universe where different forms of consciousness can thrive together. We are no longer the species that built cities on single worlds. We are the species that builds bridges between different ways of thinking." The ceremony concluded with a tradition that had emerged from the early fleet days, the stellar chorus. Voices from every Alliance species joined together in a composition that required both individual expression and collective harmony. Human voices carried the melody while Zephyrian energy patterns provided harmonic counterpoint, and Korthak warriors added rhythmic elements that resonated through ship hulls across light years. Later, in her private quarters, Elena received a message that made her smile. It was from Titan Station, now a museum maintained by the Hegemony Collective Consciousness. Her mother's engineering logs had been preserved and were being studied by absorbed civilizations trying to understand how individual human consciousness had evolved so quickly. The message included a recording her mother had made before the station's absorption. "Elena, by the time you hear this, we'll be part of something larger. Don't mourn for us. We chose this path just as you chose yours. The important thing is that choice exists. Keep choosing, daughter. Keep showing the universe that consciousness can decide its own destiny." Elena smiled through tears, understanding finally that the war hadn't been between humanity and the hegemony. It had been between different philosophies of existence, and both had won by learning to coexist. Outside her observation window, the stars painted patterns that spoke of infinite possibilities. Somewhere among them, her mother's consciousness lived on as part of something larger, while Elena's legacy moved freely through the void between worlds. The girl who had been mocked at the Academy for thinking differently had become the woman who taught the galaxy that difference itself was valuable. The stars would remember her not for the wars she had fought, but for the peace she had created. In the end, Elena Vasquez had given humanity the most precious gift possible, the freedom to become anything they chose to be, while remaining fundamentally human. The stars whispered her name across the cosmos, and in that whisper was the promise that consciousness itself would never stop evolving, never stop reaching for new forms of existence among the infinite spaces between worlds. Maya floated beside her grandmother, looking out at the same stars with eyes that saw home where Elena had once seen wilderness. The transformation was complete, but the journey was just beginning. Humanity had learned to live among the stars, and now they would learn what it meant to shepherd the galaxy itself toward ever greater possibilities. The universe was vast, consciousness was flexible, and the future belonged to those brave enough to choose their own evolution.